As I tiptoed up the stairs of my own house, a place that once felt like a safe haven, my heart pounded against my chest. I avoided the third step, notorious for its creak, a small detail Daniel always promised to fix but never did. Clutching my phone, prepared to record, I felt like an intruder in my own home. The murmur of voices from the bedroom grew louder with each step. Pressing my ear against the door, my breath hitched. The voices belonged to Daniel, my husband of a decade, and Emma, his ex-girlfriend he casually referred to as just an old friend. Hearing Daniel's voice, laced with a familiarity that made my stomach churn, I silently started recording. "I never thought I'd run into you again working at that gas station. This must be fate," he said, his tone intimate and unsettling. "Ah, why did I marry her? Why did you marry your husband?" His words, dripping with disdain, were a sharp jab to my heart. "I thought she'd be docile, easy to control. If I can control the money, I can spend however I want," he continued, each word slicing through me. Emma's giggling followed. "A free housekeeper?" she teased. Their laughter was a cruel melody that filled the room. The raw spite in their conversation was overwhelming. My hands shook with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. How could Daniel, the man I had loved and trusted, speak about me with such malice? Pushing the door open, I confronted them. Their shocked faces briefly satisfied the storm inside me, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. "So, this is what you really think of me?" My voice was eerily calm, belying the turmoil inside. Daniel fumbled for words, but I wasn't there to listen. I came for something else. Retribution. "You're going to regret every single word," I whispered, more to myself than to them. I turned and left them scrambling for excuses I had no interest in hearing. Descending the stairs, a plan began to crystallize in my mind. Daniel had unveiled his true self, and it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. I would see to that. As I sat in the dim light of the living room, the shadows seemed to mock me, echoing the darkness that had settled in my heart. The events of the evening replayed in my mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. But amidst this turmoil, memories of the past crept in, unwelcome yet persistent. I remembered the first time I met Daniel. It was at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was charismatic, his laughter infectious, and his interest in me flattering. "You have this warmth about you, Laura," he had said, his eyes locked with mine. "It's so rare and genuine." I was swept away by his charm, believing I had found someone who truly saw me. But as our relationship progressed, so did the subtle changes in Daniel. The man who once admired my independence began to question it. "Why do you need to work so hard? I can take care of us," he'd say, his words initially sounding like care but slowly morphing into control. The night we got engaged, I remembered feeling a twinge of doubt. "Are you sure about this, Laura?" my best friend Julia had asked, her eyes searching mine for uncertainty. I brushed her concerns aside, convinced that love would conquer all. But love wasn't enough to blind me from the truth. Daniel's mask began to slip after our wedding. His sweet words turned sour, his gestures of care became constraints. "A woman like you should focus on the home," he'd insist, chipping away at my confidence and independence. It was the same story every day. Daniel would come home, his eyes scanning the house for any imperfection, any excuse to belittle me. "What have you been doing all day? This place is a mess," he'd snarl, even when everything was spotless. I tried to hold on, to believe that this was just a phase, that the loving Daniel I knew was still there. But that night, hearing him with Emma, shattered any illusions I had left. The man I married was a facade, a cruel illusion. Rage simmered within me, not just for his betrayal, but for the years of manipulation, for making me doubt my worth. But this rage was different. It was clarifying, empowering. It was the catalyst I needed. "I won't be a victim anymore," I whispered to the empty room. Daniel had made his choice, and now it was time to make mine. It was time for him to learn that the woman he thought he could control was not going to bow down any longer. The morning light did nothing to ease the turmoil inside me. Over a cup of coffee that tasted more bitter than usual, I dialed Julia's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice heavy with concern. "I need your help," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging within. "I'm setting a trap for Daniel, and I need you to play along." Julia didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need, Laura, I'm here for you." The plan was simple yet effective. I told Daniel about a spontaneous weekend getaway with Julia. His reaction was predictably self-centered. "Sure, go have fun. You deserve a break," he said, barely looking up from his phone. The smirk that followed told me everything I needed to know. On the day of our supposed trip, I packed a bag and left, making sure Daniel saw me. But instead of heading to the airport, I drove to a nearby cafe, a strategic spot with a clear view of our house. Julia joined me there, her presence a comforting reminder that I wasn't alone in this. We didn't have to wait long. An hour later, Emma, clad in a black dress and oversized sunglasses, appeared on our street. She glanced around nervously before slipping into my house. "Got you," I muttered under my breath. Julia placed a hand on my shoulder. "What now, Laura?" "Now we wait," I said, my eyes fixed on the bedroom window. The waiting was the hardest part. With each passing minute, my resolve hardened. I thought of all the lies, the disrespect, the betrayal. It wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I made my move. Quietly unlocking the front door, I tiptoed up the stairs, the same stairs I had ascended just nights before. The murmurs from the bedroom were clearer this time, their laughter echoing in the hallway. Without a word, I flung open the bedroom door. The look on Daniel and Emma's faces was priceless, a mix of shock, fear, and guilt. But I didn't linger for explanations or excuses. "You're pathetic, both of you," I spat out, my voice laced with contempt. Without another word, I left them scrambling to cover up their indiscretions. As I walked out of the house, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. It was the first step towards my freedom, towards a life where I was no longer a puppet in Daniel's twisted game. The morning after my confrontation with Daniel and Emma, I awoke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. As I sipped my coffee, the events of the previous night replayed in my mind, fueling my determination. I called Julia, who answered with a worried tone. "Laura, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Julia. More than fine, actually. I'm ready for the next step," I replied, a steely edge in my voice. I had a plan, one that would not only expose Daniel, but also leave him with a taste of the humiliation and pain he had caused me. "I need you to spread the word about Daniel and Emma. Let everyone know what kind of man my husband really is," I instructed Julia. Without hesitation, Julia agreed. "Consider it done. Everyone will know the truth about Daniel." The wheels were in motion, but I needed to confront Daniel one more time. I wanted him to see the consequences of his actions, to understand that he couldn't treat people like disposable objects without repercussions. I returned home unexpectedly, finding Daniel in the living room, a picture of guilt. "Laura, he began, but I cut him off. "Save it, Daniel. I know everything. And soon everyone else will too," I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. Daniel's face turned white. "What do you mean, everyone else?" "Oh, I made sure our little suburban community knows all about your affair with Emma. How does it feel, Daniel, to be exposed for who you really are?" I asked, the satisfaction evident in my tone. Daniel stammered, trying to formulate a response, but it was clear he was shaken. "You can't do this to me, Laura. You're ruining my reputation." "Your reputation?" I laughed bitterly. "What about my life, Daniel? What about the years I spent living with your lies and manipulation? This is just the beginning. You'll see what it's like to have your life turned upside down." As I turned to leave, I left Daniel with a final thought. "You should have treated me with respect, Daniel. You're about to learn a hard lesson in karma." Walking out of that room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had taken control of my story, and while the road ahead would be challenging, I was ready to face it head-on, free from Daniel's shadow. The next morning dawned with a sense of inevitability. I knew that the fallout from my actions was just beginning. As I prepared my breakfast, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Ignoring it, I relished the brief moment of calm before the storm. Finally, I answered, already knowing who it would be. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked, my voice icy. "Laura, please, you have to stop this madness," Daniel pleaded, the desperation clear in his voice. "Madness? Oh, you mean telling the truth, exposing you for the liar and cheater you are?" I countered, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. Daniel was silent for a moment, likely grappling with the reality of his situation. "You're destroying everything I have, Laura. My job, my reputation." And what about what you destroyed, Daniel? Did you think about that when you were with Emma? Did you think about us? I asked, the hurt underlying my anger. Daniel's voice broke slightly. I know I made a mistake, but this isn't the way to handle it. We can work this out, Laura. I laughed humorlessly. Work this out? There's nothing left to work out, Daniel. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. But Laura, No, Daniel. It's over. You've lost the right to have a say in how I handle this. You lost that right when you betrayed me, I interrupted, cutting him off. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I knew that Daniel was finally starting to understand the gravity of his actions. Goodbye, Daniel, I said firmly, ending the call. As I put down the phone, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. I had set my plan in motion, and there was no turning back now. Daniel would have to face the consequences of his actions, just as I had to face the heartbreak he caused. But in that moment, I also felt a sense of empowerment. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the author of my own destiny, and I was writing a new chapter, one where I was in control. The days following my conversation with Daniel were a whirlwind of emotion and activity. Word of his infidelity had spread like wildfire, and the once respected man found himself the subject of whispers and sidelong glances. It was the beginning of his unraveling, and in a twisted way, it was satisfying to watch. I was sitting in my living room, the silence of the house echoing around me when I heard the front door open. Daniel walked in, his usual confident demeanor replaced by one of defeat. "Laura, we need to talk," he said, his voice void of its usual command. I looked up at him, my expression stoic. "There's nothing left to say, Daniel." He took a deep breath, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please, Laura, I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over." "Start over?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "After everything you've done, you think we can just start over? You destroyed our marriage, Daniel. There's no coming back from that." Daniel's face contorted with frustration. "You're being unreasonable, Laura. You're letting your emotions get the better of you." "My emotions?" I laughed bitterly. "My emotions are the only thing keeping me sane right now. You betrayed me, Daniel. You humiliated me, and now you have to live with the consequences." Daniel stepped closer, his voice softening. "I love you, Laura. I never wanted to hurt you." I stood up, anger coursing through me. "Love? You don't know the first thing about love. Love isn't deceit and betrayal. Love isn't sneaking around behind your partner's back." Daniel reached out, but I stepped back. Don't you dare touch me." He stopped, his hand hanging in the air. "What do you want from me, Laura?" "I want a divorce, Daniel. I want to be free from this lie of a marriage," I said, my voice unwavering. Daniel's face fell, the realization finally sinking in. A divorce. "Yes, a divorce. It's the only way I can start to heal from the damage you've caused." Daniel looked defeated, the weight of his actions finally dawning on him. He nodded slowly, a silent acceptance of the end. As he left the house, I felt a sense of liberation. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I was taking back my life, one step at a time. The decision to divorce Daniel was like setting a heavy burden down, but with it came a flood of practicalities and legalities. I spent days gathering documents and speaking with lawyers, ensuring I was prepared for the road ahead. One afternoon, amidst a pile of paperwork, the doorbell rang. Standing on my doorstep was Daniel, looking more haggard than I had ever seen him. His eyes were desperate, searching. "Laura, I've been thinking, we can still fix this. We can start over, maybe move to a new place, a fresh start," he pleaded, his voice shaky. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "Daniel, it's over. There's nothing left to salvage." He took a step closer, his desperation palpable. "I can change, Laura. I'll do anything." "Change?" I scoffed. "You had years to change. This is just you trying to avoid the consequences of your actions." Daniel's face hardened. "You're being vindictive, Laura. You're just trying to punish me." "Punish you?" I asked, my voice rising. "You think this is about punishment? This is about respect, something you never showed me." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "What do you want from me?" "I want a divorce, Daniel. I want to be free from this toxic relationship. I want to find happiness, something you never cared about." Daniel's posture deflated. "You really won't give us another chance?" "There is no us anymore, Daniel. You made sure of that, I replied, my tone final. He stared at me for a moment, a mix of sorrow and anger in his eyes, then turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. This was the end of a chapter, but the beginning of something new for me. In the days that followed, I received calls from mutual friends, some expressing support, others unsure of what to say. It was clear that Daniel's image in our community had crumbled. The man once admired was now seen for who he truly was. As I sat in my now quiet house, I realized this was my chance to rebuild, to create a life that was truly mine, free from the shadows of deceit and manipulation. Daniel's downfall was his own doing, and I, at last, was free to move forward. The divorce proceedings were draining, a constant back and forth of legal jargon and negotiations. But with each signed document, I felt a piece of my old constrained life fall away, replaced by a sense of liberation and new possibilities. One brisk morning, as I sat in my attorney's office, the final papers were presented to me. My hand was steady as I signed my name, officially ending my marriage to Daniel. It felt like signing a declaration of freedom. Leaving the office, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. The pain, the betrayal, and finally, the vindication. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Daniel, it was about reclaiming my own life. As I walked through the park, the crisp air felt refreshing, almost symbolic of my new start. I passed couples walking hand in hand and families playing on the grass, each scene a reminder of what life could offer beyond the confines of a toxic relationship. Later that day, as I sat in my now quiet and peaceful home, I received a call from Julia. "Laura, have you heard about Daniel?" I paused, a twinge of curiosity mingling with indifference. "No, what about him?" "He's struggling, Laura. Lost his job, his friends. He's a shadow of the man he once was. It's like he's gotten a taste of his own medicine," Julia said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. I sighed, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "Julia, I don't take pleasure in his suffering, but he brought this upon himself. It's the result of his actions, not mine." "You're right, Laura. You've handled this with such strength. So what's next for you?" Julia asked, her voice warm. I looked around my home, a place that once felt like a prison but now felt like a sanctuary. "I'm going to start living for myself, Julia, rediscover my passions, maybe travel, meet new people. I have a whole world to explore, and for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about the future." There was a lightness in my heart as I spoke, a sense of adventure and hope. The journey had been difficult, but it led me to this moment of self-realization and empowerment. "I'm proud of you, Laura. You deserve all the happiness in the world," Julia said, her voice filled with affection. As we ended the call, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter where I was the author and the story was mine to write.